Loading hot takes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back into TwinTakes Fantasy Football, and today we're going to be playing one of my favorite games, Would You Rather. Now, this is definitely not uncommon for a fantasy football channel to talk about, but most of the Would You Rathers that I've seen floating around the Twitter machine and YouTube have been, would you rather take X player at this ADP or Y player at this ADP? And for a concrete example, it's like, would you rather take Patrick Mahomes in the 4th, or would you rather take Trey Lance in the 9th? And while that's a great conversation to have, it's on the presupposition that that player, in this case Trey Lance, is going to be available in the 9th, and you don't know that. When you're sitting at your position in the 4th, you don't know if Trey Lance will be available in the 9th, or if some very gung-ho league mate is going to be taking Trey Lance in the 8th or maybe even in the 7th. So the would you rather game that I want to play today is, if you're sitting at your pick in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round, whatever round it is, and you're trying to decide between two players at a pretty similar ADP, and you know you can't get both of them on the turn, that's what we're going to do, our Would You Rather here. And I'll post the ADPs just for reference here on screen, so you can look at them and kind of see at what point in the draft you need to make these considerations. But like I said, this is going to be particularly, you can only take one of these players. You can't take both. This is basically like you're sitting at the 5th round and you have to take either this player or that player, and on the presupposition that that neither of them are going to get back to you on the next draft pick. So let's start off. We're going to start out with a bang. We're going to start off with maybe my favorite Would You Rather, because these are actually the two players that inspired me to make this video. And that's going to be Courtland Sutton or Mike Williams. And not only are they pretty similarly aligned with ADP, 51.8 for Courtland and 49.8 for Mike Williams, but they are just an absolutely, they're pretty comparable players. They're both big body wide receivers. They both win, they both high point the ball. They both win at contested catches. They're both field stretchers. They both win down the field. They're both in the powerhouse arms race division that is the AFC West. They both have top 10 quarterbacks. They both signed long-term extensions with their respective teams last year. Yeah. If you put them side by side, it'd be hard to kind of find differences between the two wide receivers, which is why they're going so similarly. But I would say, to kind of differentiate between Courtland and Mike Williams, I'm going to say which one has the better quarterback in my opinion, and to no one's surprise, it's going to be Justin Herbert. And also, I think that Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams are going to be a little bit more involved in the total offense than Austin Eckler and whatever amalgamation of backup running backs are going on there in Chargers land. So the fact that I think the passing game was going to take an uptick in Los Angeles, not San Diego, as well as the fact that Justin Herbert is just a better quarterback in my opinion. If I'm faced at, that 4th round ADP and I'm looking at Mike Williams or Courtland Sutton, I'm taking Mike Williams 10 times out of 10. Before I move on to my second one, it should be something to note that the ADP I'm using here is from Sleeper. It's not from ESPN. I'm not particularly fond of the ESPN ADPs. It doesn't align with what I think is kind of the fantasy consensus of, pro players. Or not pro players, but like people who are definitely more involved in fantasy, more experienced with fantasy. So I think Sleeper in my mind represents a better representation of how I view fantasy players, which is why I'm going with this particular ADP and not the ESPN sites or Yahoo sites ADP. So just want to throw that out there. If you're saying, well, this ADP is all wrong, it's from Sleeper. That's where I got my ADP numbers from. Moving into my second, Would You Rather, it would be Trey Lance versus Dak Prescott. Another QB question for you. This one is interesting, and I'll explain why. Current Sleeper ADP for Dak is 84 and Trey Lance is 104. I like, again, Sleeper's ADP because Trey Lance is rated much, much higher than is Sleeper than he is in ESPN. I think he's going way too late in ESPN leagues, but we've seen a meteoric rise in Trey Lance in fantasy drafts over the past couple weeks. And some mock drafts I've watched and partaken in, I've seen Trey Lance even go ahead of Dak Prescott. He's sometimes the 6th or 7th QB off the board after Jalen Hurts, which is ridiculous just because of that running upside and people want to be in on, the get in on Trey Lance before he actually becomes to be this fantasy darling or this fantasy star, the way people were trying to get in on Kyler, whether they're trying to get in on Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson before their breakout seasons respectively. So if you'd asked me this question a week ago, it would have been easily Dak Prescott, just because I see his ADP slipping, and I would rather have someone who's been there and done that before take the reins of my fantasy team. And obviously with Trey Lance, all the traits are there, all the system for success is there under Kyle Shanahan, that I would even be able to stomach him in the 7th or 6th round. But again, I believed in the Dallas offense. I believed in Dak Prescott a year removed from that ankle injury. However, the Tyron Smith injury news really kind of shook things up for me. I've seen with not only Tyron's injury having him out for the rest of the year, with also Lyle Collins' departure and Connor Williams moving on, that offensive line has been absolutely decimated. As I explained in at my Twitter, go check it out, at TwinTakesFF. I explained that the Dallas offense goes as the offensive line goes, and showed some metrics from PFF describing the correlation between the offensive line grades and then the offensive points scored for Dallas. And with Tyron Smith's injury, I'm giving a huge downgrade to Dak Prescott. Trey Lance, even in the 6th or the 7th round, I can stomach that ADP. And I do believe in his rushing upside is going to be kind of the savior for him, just the way that it was, it allowed Jalen Hurts to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback last year, despite being a pretty average real life quarterback. So at this point, I am going to go with Trey Lance over Dak Prescott. And ESPN, that's a smash. Wait till the 9th round, grab Trey Lance in the 9th round. I think that's an absolute cheat code to win all of your fantasy leagues that you're drafting at the ESPN. In Sleeper, you're going to have to pay up a little bit more for him, but I'm totally okay with that. All right. Moving on to our third would you rather, which is it's the same team would you rather in the same position. That's going to be Tyreek Hill or Jaylen Waddle. Both tremendous wide receivers down there in this Mike McDaniel's offense that's getting a ton of hype, especially after this preseason game against the Eagles this past week. Jaylen Waddle sat out due to an undisclosed injury, and Tyreek Hill looked fantastic, especially with that opening 50-yard bomb from Tua. I'm actually really happy that happened, because it's driving up the ADP of Tyreek Hill and driving down the ADP of Jaylen Waddle. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I'm super high on Jaylen Waddle and not as high on Tyreek Hill. I'm not going to take Tyreek Hill in the 2nd or even 3rd round. I don't believe his method of production, his history of production is going to align well with the arm strength of Tua and the consistency spread out over an entire season. I believe in Mike McDaniel. I don't think he's a liar. I think he says Jaylen Waddle will be ready for week 1. He says Jaylen will be 100% by week 1. And if I can scoop up Jaylen in the 4th or even in the 5th, I think that's a smash play. But if you're sitting at the end of the 3rd round deciding between these two wide receivers, it's Jaylen 10 times out of 10. I believe he's going to provide a more consistent base and floor for your fantasy team. And that's what you kind of want building your team in the first 4 picks. All right. 4th, would you rather? It's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Rashod Bateman. These are 2 sophomore wide receivers that, while they weren't amazing last year, they definitely showed spurts of brilliance, just these absolute epiphanies of talent and fantasy scoring. They're also currently sitting at the number 1 position in their respective offenses. So as a player comp, they are pretty similar, and then their ADPs reflect that as well. Probably picking these guys up in the 6th round, if you're looking in the 6th round to kind of maybe be that 3rd wide receiver. Amon-Ra at 68 or so, and Rashod Bateman a little bit after him at 75. This one's pretty easy for me. It's going to be Rashod Bateman, just because while I believe Amon-Ra St. Brown might be slightly more talented than Rashod Bateman, I believe in the quarterback of Lamar Jackson much more than Jared Goff. I believe in the opportunity that Rashod Bateman is going to get. He is the clear number 1 wide receiver, and that will not change over the course of the season. As Jameson Williams gets incorporated into that offense down the stretch in Detroit, I believe he's going to take away some targets and opportunity from Amon-Ra St. Brown. And obviously the most critical part of the fantasy season is that championship stretch, where I think Rashod Bateman is going to hit his stride in that Ravens offense. So between Amon-Ra and Rashod, it's pretty easy pick to Bateman for me. Moving on to kind of similar wide receivers around that 6th round pick. Maybe you're not in on Amon-Ra or Rashod, so then you find yourself deciding between Darnell Mooney and Brandon Cooks. These are both wide receivers that are the clear number 1 in their respective offenses. They both have sophomore quarterbacks. They both are in what we can say bottom 5 teams in the league. Darnell Mooney's 73 ADP or so. Brandon Cooks a little bit higher at 62. And this one's not as easy, but I will have to go with Brandon Cooks here. I talked about this with Dak versus Trey. The offensive line in Chicago is absolutely abysmal. As long as Laramie Tunsil is still sitting there in Houston, I believe that he'll be able to hold up the line just long enough for Davis Mills to get the ball out to Brandon Cooks, and I believe Brandon Cooks is slightly more talented than Darnell Mooney, despite being at a much older age. Brandon Cooks has a history of production, and I believe that Justin Fields' scrambling ability will take away some of those easy passes. Davis Mills, not a scrambler whatsoever. He will be targeting or hyper-targeting Brandon Cooks, and I think Brandon Cooks is going to be a great option as maybe a third or fourth wide receiver on your team. So taking Brandon Cooks in this one. Moving on, going back to running backs, we're talking about Dameon Pierce or Chase Edmonds. Current ADP is 107, but we know that's definitely not reflective of... Actually, both of these ADPs are pretty low compared to where they're actually going in drafts. Chase Edmonds, I've seen creep up in the 5th, 6th round. Dameon Pierce, you better be taking him in the 6th round or you're not getting him at all. So while these ADPs are a little bit... they're not accurate. However, Dameon Pierce and Chase Edmonds are still... Despite both of their meteoric rises over the past couple weeks in ADP, they're still around the same draft capital that you have to invest, potentially a 6th round on both of them. I think there's a ton of upside for both of these guys, Dameon Pierce and Chase Edmonds. While they're both rumored to be in committee backs in their respective places, they both are clearly going to be the number 1 backs. I've talked at length about both these guys being potential fantasy league winners, but I'm going to go with... Dameon Pierce here. I talked about this in my running backs win you league. I am biased towards the younger running backs, and Dameon Pierce is a rookie. I think he's going to absolutely dominate in that Houston's offense. He also has a lot less competition. Chase Edmonds will obviously have to deal with Sony Michel, Raheem Mostert, Myles Gaskin, Salvin Ahmed. Not to mention Waddle and Tyreek probably taking handoffs in the backfield as well. Cedric Wilson is also something you cannot forget about in that Miami Dolphins. There's just a lot more weapons. So Chase Edmonds as a whole will get a lot smaller piece of the offensive pie. Dameon Pierce, I think he's going to immediately step into that number 1 position out there in the running back spot in Houston. He's a better pass protector than Rex Burkhead is, which means he'll also be out there in a lot more plays not involved around running the ball, and then he'll be there for the dump offs from Davis Mills. So I both think these guys are tremendous values at ADP. You can't go wrong with either one of them. I'm taking Dameon Pierce 10 times out of 10. All right, moving on, a little bit more high-powered, would you rather. This one's going to be Stefon Diggs or Devonta Adams. This is kind of where you find yourself at that 1-2 turn. Let's say the top 3 wide receivers in Kupp, Jefferson, and Chase are already off the board, and you want to start your draft out strong with a good wide receiver. And really, it seems like you can't go wrong with Diggs or Adams, but you want to make sure you're picking the right one. These guys are also pretty similar when it comes to evaluating the player as a whole. They're both a little bit more up there in age. 1 year apart, Diggs is 28 while Adams is 29. They are by far and away clearly the number 1 wide receiver option in each of their respective offenses. They both are on pretty pass-happy offenses. Devonta Adams gets a little bit more of the bump in that regard, being in the offensive juggernaut that is the AFC West. But between Derek Carr and Josh Allen, they're both, top 10 QBs, top 12-ish. Maybe Derek Carr is a little bit on that borderline, but they're both pretty decent QBs that are going to be throwing the ball a lot and providing plenty of target share to both of their respective wide receivers. But if push comes to shove, I am taking Stefon Diggs over Devonta Adams. And all that comes down to is the fact that, listen, the offensive line out there in Las Vegas is terrible. I think... Alex Leatherwood, while he showed some promise at guard, he absolutely was the worst rated offensive lineman in all of football, according to PFF last year, recording multiple single-digit grades at the offensive line over the course of a few games. So I don't know if that offensive line was going to allow Devonta Adams' routes to progress and develop, and then when Derek Carr is hurried, he'll either be sacked, either have to throw the ball away or dump it down to someone closer to the line of scrimmage, maybe a Darren Waller, maybe a Josh Jacobs, or a Hunter Renfrow, and it's going to, inversely impact the way Devonta Adams, he wins down the field, he wins and creates separation. He's a tremendous wide receiver, personally one of the best wide receivers, if not the best in my opinion, but he needs time for those routes to develop, and I just don't think that offensive line is going to be able to get that for him. While the Bills' offensive line isn't something to write home about. It's not the best. It's better than what the Raiders have out there in Las Vegas, and I believe that Stefon Diggs is going to be, the safest pick here at the 1-2 turn. All right, moving into going back to running backs, the number 8th. Would you rather have today is Travis Etienne or Breece Hall. Both of them are technically rookies, as this is the season that they're both going to be seeing the NFL field for the first time. Travis Etienne, well, this is his second year. Obviously, he was out with Liz Frank injury, I believe it was last year, and missed the entire season. They're both floating around that RB dead zone. So, this is like after you've picked up your first 2 running backs, after you picked up your first 2 wide receivers, and you really don't know what to do with the RB dead zone. It's labeled that for a reason. Again, they're both young. We haven't seen any production by either of them, so a lot of this is pure speculation, pure projection of what they can do. And I would say that they're both in not great offenses, probably bottom 6 offenses in the Jags and Jets. But if push comes to shove, I am going to take Travis Etienne. Also, both of these guys, they have pretty solid running mates that they're sharing the RB room with. Breece Hall has Michael Carter, who was great last year. Travis Etienne has James Robinson, who, despite coming back from an Achilles injury, has been fantasy relevant for both his years in the league and is a tremendous player in his own right. Both of them are going to cede targets and carries to their respective backfield partner. However, Travis Etienne, for all intents and purposes, is the guy. There's been reports out of training camp that he is basically their version of Deebo Samuel in that offense. There's not many wide receiving options on the team outside of Christian Kirk. I'm not really excited about Laviska Shenault or anyone else, maybe Marvin Jones. So I believe that Travis Etienne will be lined up in the slot and take passing downs as well. While Breece Hall, you're contending with Elijah Moore, who I'm really, really high on. I like him a lot. And Garrett Wilson. Only to mention that he currently is listed as the RB2 behind Michael Carter. Michael Carter is certainly a better pass protector, which means in those situations where it's not a designed run, Michael Carter will most likely be out in the field where Breece Hall will be on the sideline. So with all that being said, plus I'm going to lead into the college connection of Trevor Lawrence and Etienne. We're only 2 years removed from them lighting it up down there in Clemson. So I like Travis Etienne being a little bit behind Breece Hall. I will much gladly watch people take Breece Hall. And then if I'm going to take a running back there in the 4th round, Travis Etienne is my guy. Pretty clearly, no hedge, all Travis Etienne 10 times out of 10. Keeping on in that RB dead zone for the 9th, would you rather, is going to be Cam Akers or JK Dobbins. Both these guys coming off pretty serious injuries. ACL for JK, Achilles for Cam Akers. They're both on pretty dynamic and high-powered offenses. They're both in their 3rd year. Very, very similar players. However, I'm going to take JK Dobbins just from the sole fact that, listen, I love Rashod Bateman, but outside of that, there really isn't too much of a wide receiver threat. Yeah, Mark Andrews is probably going to be the number 1 target, passing target in that offense, but Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, they've both been in the league for about 3 to 4 years now and really haven't made their mark. The Ravens are a predominantly running team. They really, between Lamar and what they have done in the past, they generally run the ball a ton, and I'm going to take that upside on J.K. Dobbins. It's being part of one of the best running offenses in the entire league, plus the fact that Gus Edwards is on the PUP to start the season. So even as a running mate in the backfield there, he won't have much competition until later on in the season. And after that, J.K. Dobbins will establish himself as the number 1 running back in that offense. Cam Akers, listen, I love the Rams. That offense is dynamic and led a lot of people to fantasy championships last year. However, Darrell Henderson is still there. I think that there is substance to the rumors that Sean McVay is changing the way he treats the running back room instead of going to a full bell cow, which he did with Todd Gurley a few years ago. He's changing his mind. I think even if Cam Akers is back and fully healthy, he's going to be splitting a lot of carries with Darrell Henderson. Even in Kyron Williams has looked good in preseason. I think he could come in for some 3rd down back roles. Also, Matt Stafford's going to throw the ball a lot, and between Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson, those are both top 20 wide receivers in my opinion. It's a lot to contend with from the passing game, and I just don't think the opportunity will be there. Plus, Darrell Henderson eating into his targets makes Cam Akers a little bit flashy, a little bit less sexy than what his current ADP has him ranked as. I know Cam Akers is currently scheduled or slotted to go a round above J.K. Dobbins, but I'm happy to take a wide receiver in that round, like a Mike Williams that we talked about earlier, and then take J.K. if I need a running back coming back around on that 4th, 5th turn, early 5th round. Last, would you rather here? Number 10, Terry McLaurin or DK Metcalf. Both fantastic players, both pretty young. I believe they're the same age. Didn't look that up before this recording. They are both on pretty horrible offenses. I hate, everything about the Seattle Seahawks this year, as well as the Commanders. That's definitely not a secret. But despite them being in terrible offenses, they're both clearly number one in each respective offense, and they both have been top 20 fantasy assets in the past. This is a really hard one. They're both going to be like a 4th round pick. They might slip to the top of the 5th round, but they both have been pretty inconsistent given the nature of their offenses over the past years. And even with DK being pretty consistent in the past, I expect with Drew Lock or Geno Smith at quarterback, I believe Geno Smith is going to be the starter going into the season. I don't know if Geno can really sustain that consistent production for DK, while Terry McLaurin, he has been a fantasy roller coaster the past 2 years. I know I'm trying not to let bias creep in because I've had Terry McLaurin on my roster and he's been such a disappointment for me in the past, especially as it comes down to playoff time. But I am going to believe in the talent here. I believe DK is probably a little bit more talented than Terry McLaurin. Their running mates, for Terry, he has Jahan Dotson, who's a rookie who has been absolutely incredible in training camp and in the preseason. For DK Metcalf, his running mate is Tyler Lockett, who is getting a little bit older, losing probably a little bit of a step there. So less competition from the wide receiver 2 in their respective offenses. And we've seen a little bit, we have at least a tiny bit of a sample size between Geno and DK from last year. We have no idea how Terry and Carson Wentz are going to work together. Plus, I absolutely loathe Carson Wentz. I think he's a terrible quarterback. And I just don't want any piece of the Commanders' offense. So by default, I have to go with DK here. I've seen DK actually slip to the top of the 5th round, which I think is incredible value for him. And definitely, if I'm facing that decision at the end of the 4th round between Terry and DK, it's DK 10 times out of 10. Alright, so that was 10 would you rather scenarios that you will most likely be faced with in your upcoming fantasy football draft. I hope I gave you some information and good knowledge in order for you to make that decision between those 2 players that might have caused a little bit of a struggle during your draft. Or maybe I just gave you more confidence in the decision you already made. If you did disagree with the players I chose, please post who you would have rather taken down below in the comments and the reason why. This has been a ton of fun, but I'm going to cap it here at 10 players. I'm going to continue this in a part 2 in the next few days that are going to be 10 more scenarios that are pertinent to the current draft season that's in full force right now. So I'm very excited to do that. Keep an eye out, and as I play you guys out, I'll give you one more bonus would you rather. 2 wide receivers on the same team, back-to-back in ADP, Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore. I'm taking Elijah Moore. Have a good one.